Hi, this is Robin Monotti, and I'd like to just say a couple of words about a book that I've now managed to read in good detail um, throughout and reread certain parts, taken notes. So I've tried to not do a superficial reading. The book in question is, you probably may have heard of it, is by a professor of psychology called Mattias Desmet, and the book is called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. Um, the book has received certain critiques, mainly along the lines that it's sort of giving a free pass to the perpetrators and of the, let's say, the restrictions of freedom justified by a virus over the last 3 years. Um, and that it somehow blames the victims for having um, basically a view of everything that happened, which in certain ways is a psychological condition, let's say, that allowed it to happen. So that's kind of the basis of the critiques. Now, while I understand why people who are very angry about what happened would say that, and while there are certain passages in the book that can be interpreted as that, especially if you've got a lot of anger and you're trying to look for something that is not there, then you may feel ultimately angry about it. But I don't think that really was the point of the book. And starting from the title, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, it's already not saying that this is about naming the perpetrators or accusing those who are responsible, or saying these are the people who did it. That's not even the description of the book. So it's not really the ambition. So to once again, because I think I find this quite often in a lot of these debates that happen within, let's say, a group that understands what happened. Once again, I think things are judged according to parameters which do not belong to them. If you want that, if you want to sort of name perpetrators, then go and get the real Anthony Fauci. But whereas that is a very good book that describes how things happen in a forensic way and in a sort of financial way in certain levels, in the influence in politics and individuals who use their influence and their money and their politics and their credentials to achieve certain goals. This book instead is doing something totally different. How I would like, because quite often I found some passages and I thought, well, I would have phrased it slightly differently. And we all would phrase things differently according to how we see them. But how I would describe it is that what it actually does is it answers the question: why did so many people go along with what, for a lot of us, were obvious lies? So if you're looking for the answer to that question, I think the book is very good, because it shows that a particular way of thinking, which unfortunately pervades our culture since the Enlightenment, so since this belief that reason has all the answers, inevitably creates new gods or priest-like figures And in our society, these are the doctors and the scientists. And it's not that, and some people abuse that power. But the question still remains, what level of psychology do you need to accept to give that power to them? To actually listen without questioning? You know, how did that happen? And yes, they did censor different views. Yes, they created a climate for all of that to happen. But a lot of us figured it out very early on. So how did so many people go along with it? Yes, you've got sort of Ash experiments of conforming, and you've got all of that going on. True, human nature likes to go along with the group, but still, and then there's the gradual. So there are technical ways in which they achieved it. The gradual, incremental degree of insanity that gets pushed onto society, and people ultimately end up behaving in a totally insane way, thinking it's the most rational thing on the planet, like wearing some kind of pieces of plastic on the face, thinking that it's going to stop diseases or some absurdities which are justified through science. So the question is, the book explains how this is a arrested stage of psychological development to a stage in the development of the child when they learn to separate from the mother, in which something needs to happen for the child to become an individual and stop believing that their worth is given by the mummy or daddy. And today we call it science and medicine. And what needs to happen is a personal responsibility to become creative, oneself, and to create one's own narrative, one's own truth, and one's own journey. If you were not able to do that in childhood, you may still not be able to do that today. And then you become what the book describes, someone who sees things in a mechanistic way, because that mechanistic way relieves an anxiety of uncertainty. And that anxiety of uncertainty ultimately is the fear of death. But before that, it gets displaced on, if only I can be 100% sure that black is black, white, whatever it is, grey is not grey, whatever you want to believe. If I can only be 100% sure, then I can relieve my anxiety. And if you contradict me, you give me anxiety. But the issue there is that way of being, which the majority of our society holds, because unfortunately the majority of our society has undergone childhood trauma, that way of being is a refusal of uncertainty. And that's where the myth of science, the myth of modern medicine comes in, to soothe a fundamental uncertainty that is within the vast majority of people. The people who perpetrate all of this, they have that too. Not only they have that too, but for them it becomes an ideology that obviously it goes to reinforce their positions of power, so it's used to control. But ultimately it's an ideology. The ideology is the mechanistic world is the world we live in, and that's how it can only be. So my certainty is that, as a sort of tech oligarch, is that technocracy is the only way to solve the problems of the planet, because I want this certainty that there are problems that we need to fix. It gives me importance and power, and I can only do it through technocracy, which I happen to control as well. And if people don't listen to me, the planet will be destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of millions or whatever people will die, and so I have to do it regardless of your freedom. That person is also stuck in a phase of childhood trauma, and also believes that they can impose because they see the world like that themselves. So the people who go along with it, they are already agreeing fundamentally that they live in a mechanistic world which is defined by scientific experiments or data or things like that. So the problem is that, yes, it's important to contradict people who use mechanistic views of the world and things like data to justify their impositions. It's important to contradict them. But if you operate on that level, you are ultimately the same, because you are giving that level the power to determine everybody else's future. And instead, and that's where the psychology of totalitarianism comes in to offer something different, instead, it's important to realize that there is no mechanical certainty, there is no ultimate data that proves everything, and ultimately we need to find our own path through it all, and we need to allow others to find their own path through it all. And our path should first of all not be based on a mechanistic view of the world, but be based on a holistic view of what reality is, which includes other dimensions: the symbolic dimension, the poetic dimension, the artistic dimension, the spiritual dimension, the mystical dimension. It includes all of that. It doesn't exclude any of those. And ultimately, it's not simply that the more we speak out, the less we stop the mass formation. Ultimately, the mass formation is the belief in mechanistic above everything else on the planet. And in order to try and contradict that, we need to go on other planes, and we need to do something called truth-telling, or speaking the truth, which happens through different levels. And this is the subject of something that I found particularly interesting, and I'm interested in exploring further, and that's going to be the focus of my work for a while, but it may take me a while to get it all together. But ultimately, speaking the truth is different to the question, define truth, because truth is not fixed. So the moment you understand that, the moment you understand that it is a process, and that is the process we should focus on more than the scientific method, because truth happens and comes not only, it may come also through scientific methods, but not only through one method, but through all of them. So speaking the truth is actually empathizing, having a feeling for what we're talking about, and letting that feeling guide us to where we think the truth is, and expressing that. And expressing that because we are feeling and empathizing with that subject, even if we don't fully understand what the sort of nitty-gritty mechanistic aspect is, we have a feeling of where the truth may, in what direction it may be, and we may have a feeling that that's the direction we should be going in. And to be able to express that means, at times, contradicting people who come and say, I am certain that because the data is this, then you need to do that. And you need to be able to say, I don't feel that that is the truth. I feel that actually someone telling someone else do this or do that is not truthful in and of itself, because that's not how we are meant to live together, according to me. And that is truth-telling. It's not just simply jumping on the narrative of someone else and trying to find out within that narrative how you can sort of, juggle them out of their own way of seeing things. So I think the critiques of the psychology of totalitarianism by Mattias Desmet fundamentally don't really understand what the aim of the book is, because they come from within the same logic that the book tries to criticize. Yes, there is validity, I think, in people who use those critiques, because they perhaps would like to write their own book that addresses exactly who did what and the responsibilities they have and the punishment that should be given to them. But instead of displacing that anxiety onto someone who has done their own work, which is the psychology of totalitarianism by Mattias Desmet, the person who criticizes it may actually, to realize in themselves as an adult, want to go and write a different book, and they should. And I think that's what I'm going to do, actually. I think you should do it in whatever way you feel that you can. Create your own reality. But don't agree in principle, unless that is where you only want to operate, that the reality is defined in the same way that people like Bill Gates or Tedros or the World Health Organization or Jeff Bezos or even Elon Musk don't agree that reality is defined by what they consider important, by how they consider the world works, which is mechanistic. I would actually encourage people to approach it from their own way, which is not that, because if we go along with that, we fall ultimately in their trap, and it's just a matter of different colors of the trap and different ways we ultimately get trapped. And the key is to step out of all of that and find our own way through things and through the practice of telling the truth.